Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next speaker, Alisa, presenting the topic, Science and Tech-Backed Approach to Increase Productivity.
Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great time. So just a spoiler alert, I will try to keep this talk not that theory heavy and not that tech heavy. I do have some analysis, but I don't know if we have enough time to go in details over it, so I guess I'll leave it out. But you can vote on Slido if you want to see it in detail. Let's do it like that, right? So let me also do some time management. So today I wanted to talk about vague thing called productivity, but I want to narrow down the topic to the area of flow. And I will explain why in a second. So a little bit about me. Spoiler alert, I'm not professionally trained in medicine or neuroscience. It's just some weird hobby of mine to read about it, to learn about it. But I am professionally trained in mathematics and computer science. So over years, I was collecting data from tracking, from journals and everything, and looking for patterns. Again, a very weird hobby of mine. And then I realized that there are some reoccurring and persistent things that are connected to productivity, happiness, flow, stuff like that. And I thought, how does it work in my brain? Am I creating a junkie out of me? Am I actually creating some damaging patterns, or am I on the right track? So this talk is an approach top-down, where I go through the current scientific literature. I will show you how I filtered down specific papers, because there is no single opinion in science, and we'll show you how to use this data to your advantage. So a little bit about me, machine learning engineer. This is why I get how I get my hands on the data, and nerding around with data. So the structure of this topic or this presentation would be as follows. I will set the scope, why flow, how flow, what specific task, and what we're gonna take a specific look at, as well as methodology of how I was choosing the papers and what I was looking at, so that you can on your own maybe replicate them if you want to. Then we will go in every stage of the flow according to the theory and see how you can perceive the state and what you can do about it if you want to. Then I'll show you the possible analysis steps for you, for your everyday life, or even maybe your workplace to improve. I will briefly mention some additional factors that are currently not considered by science seriously, like they are hard to estimate. They can be positively or negatively correlated with the state of flow, but it's something maybe universal or way too big to be included in researches. Then I would like to go over a very simple summary and then go into the QA session. And again, if you want me to show you the actual analysis on how I would work with raw data and what I would look at in details, just please vote on Slido, like somebody put a question in, I want to see the analysis. So productivity, what is it? It's a very vague thing. It's a measurement of an input to output ratio within a time frame. And if I were to tell you about how to improve your productivity, this either will take years to talk about, because it's so non-specific and very situational, from person to task to even time of the day. But I wanted to give you something more real, something you can implement. And one thing across different scientific and science pop literature was flow. So the hypothesis of this talk is that this is something biologically scalable and can be used by every single human in pretty much every single task. Let's dig deeper into what flow is, just to set the stage and have the same understanding. According to the original and official definition, it's a mental state characterized by super absorption of the task. You don't have a feel of yourself, you don't think about yourself, you don't have the feeling of the time passing, you are in the task, you are the task. And also it's super nice experience, so that normally you want to repeat it. The state can be described with these several points like extreme focus, loss of sense, loss of time tracking, deep calm state. It's not necessarily happiness. It will depend on the person. It will depend on the task, as we will see. But generally speaking, it's a positive experience. And according to the literature, there are 4 main phases, and the 5th one is an additional one that is more not automatic, but it can improve the previous 4. And I will go into every single one of them. Limitations and scope of this talk is I've chose coding task as the main flow activity because we can also talk about sports. Like there are so many researches about elite athletes on how they utilize the super focus to get the advantage in their performance. But at the same time, if we talk about it, you might already have a hunch that it's not really compatible with cognitive task where you sit calm versus you move around. Like the areas in your brain that are engaged in this type of task are very different. So there is no point in comparing these tasks. Then also coding task gives us an opportunity to have very clear task definition, clear goal, and very clear feedback, which is paramount for flow entrance. Then I've chosen the researches that have very simple hypotheses. It's not about systemic changes in the body, but rather this part of the brain works, this part of the brain works. I know that this one is at some point is activated. So that I can find other research papers that link it or give me more information on what is actually about and how probable is it that this is correct hypothesis. Also, I included mostly reproducible researches, meaning they are using some sort of tracking that you can either by proxy or directly re-implement. Also, they don't have really weird group of participants, like elite athletes. I mean, probably somebody is here a very cool sportsman, but I don't think that it applies to everybody. It doesn't apply to me. So, general participation group, there is no specific age restriction, there is no specific ethnicity restriction. The idea is that it's generalized state. The outcome must be practical, so the experiment is very concrete and precise, and ideally, the researchers were using consumer-grade trackables and wearables. I was not including any too theoretical papers. For instance, there was one that said, let's assume this theoretical situation of a flow. Directly no. It must not be impractical, meaning if they are probing one specific brain area that is very big and science right now is not really agreeing on what it does, then it also was excluded. Suspicious. Some papers are very opinionated, and I don't think that this is a good general sign of equality. So these things were also excluded. Limited citations, meaning the paper should not be way too fresh. It must be cited by other similar works or journals, so it must be known in the community, or the author of this new paper is well-known and established author of the same or similar topics in the past. And if the results are amazingly good, red flag, don't take. Another thing to say, I definitely brought in my personal bias. When I read a paper, I do have a special amount of papers I already read, and I have an understanding, or at least I think that I have an understanding of what I'm looking at and looking for. So just be careful, there is my personal bias. Complexity ceiling, I'm not professionally trained in neuroscience, so whenever I was reading about the brain region, I was like, nope. This type of papers will also, they are included in the reference and you can read them and ask ChatGPT to translate it to them, but be careful with the translation, it's not exactly correct. But still, they are not the main body of this presentation. And science pulp references. I did include some books by psychologists, by journalists that dabble in this topic because they have a really nice summary that is going over these papers as well. So, flow is the main topic, programming task, or cognitive logical work. Simple mechanism, research of the simple mechanism, reproducible results, trustworthy, and practicality are the things that I was looking at. So another thing is biological markers. I was looking at the mostly researchers that were using wearables, as I already mentioned several times. So heart rate monitors. Heart rate variation is one of the primary things that we will be looking at. Electrodermal activity can be also measured by your watches, for instance, respiratory rate and stuff. Pupillary response and facial expression can be implemented in your home settings, but it's not reliable because of incredible personalization. Like, nobody smiles the same way. And EEG, there are advancements on the consumer grade market for EEGs, but these things are mainly for sleep, and they are also not reliable because not enough proper research is done on that, and not enough scientific pop literature is out there to actually understand for a normal person if the thing works or not. So, neurological mechanisms. As I already said, you saw the slide, we're going to go over stages: struggle, release, flow, and recovery, and reflection. Flow dimensions that you need to think about always, like flow has 3 dimensions that are prerequisite to enter, and 6 that can basically say you were in a flow or not, so they are hallmarks. You can read it a bit, but I will reference to it a little bit later as well. So in this table, you can check it out later for yourself as well. The slides will be online as well as they are on my GitHub profile. You can check it all out at your own pace. So every stage is about specific part of the journey. For instance, struggle is about setting your goal and identifying the next steps, and as well as identifying whether you need it, why you need it, setting up your internal reward-risk balance. It's characterized by increased anxiety state, and normally, but at the same time, you get this giddiness, like, okay, challenge accepted. Normally, you would use fMRI, EEG, ECG readings on this. This is not exactly very well replicatable. Then in release phase, this is the commitment phase where you say, okay, I know how to solve this. I've decided my path, and I'm confident that this specific thing I can do. So this is the relaxation period, but not to the point where you like sleep. It's just a slight relaxation from the anxious state before. This is also where your body goes into an intricate balance. Like every single millisecond, your brain and your body will assess external stimuli. Are you hungry? Am I hungry? Am I still good? Can I do this? And decide yes, 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 or no. The moment you say no, you're out of flow. Flow is this balance, however long it will take, and until you're either done with your task and you achieved your goal, or the internal balance is broken in some way. And recovery phase is when you get out of this state and you feel exhausted, because the flow state is increased resource consumption state. And this is the first place where you can use questionnaire, because obviously if you try to answer a question, am I in a flow now, you're out. The reflection is an optional phase. It's a learning phase, but not like a learning new skill thing, but rather consolidate your memories and what can I do about it? Did I like it? More self-reflection, so it's relaxed state of learning. Also can be tracked with questionnaire, can't be really tracked with any variable or heart rate variation, because again, it's way too different for every certain person. And there are some researchers that try to do this and assess the state, but there were no consistency among the readings and the outputs, so you cannot use any tracking devices here. So let's go into struggle. In struggle, as I already mentioned, you are very anxious, stressed out. You identify why you want to do this specific thing. Is it because you have an external stimuli, you will be fired, and the risk is high if you won't succeed, or you want to learn it, you present something at the conference and you really, really want to shine. It's your internal value. How does it feel? So the dopamine system fires up, the norepinephrine system also fires up. It's like, I want this. It's important for me. I want that bad that I don't want to watch something before. I don't need to drink coffee now. I'm good. So your pupils are dilated because it's, first of all, cognitive work, as well as slight stress. Shallow breaths and increased respiratory rates. So normal state would be like, again, please do take it with a grain of salt. You might have a different reaction to challenge because of your mindset and the background, but this is the most common pattern. Then your HRV is lower and it has patterns of increased sympathetic nervous system activity, which is fight or flight. So basically, before the bliss of flow, you will be anxious. And you have an increased body temperature because, again, you are stressed, you are mobilizing all of your resources. Two things to look at on your wearables would be your respiratory rate, it is increased. And so, for instance, whatever you had the previous level, it needs to go up. And at the same time, if you have an advanced reporting on your watches, for instance, then you will also see stress level increase based on the sympathetic nervous system activation. In the release phase, before I forgot. So on the lower left part, the three brains, this is an interesting part. Normally, you think about yourself a lot. Can I do this? What will happen to me if I don't do this? Am I good enough? The default mode network is almost always on, and this is one responsible for this type of thoughts, as well as the time perception also depends on whether this part of the brain is active or not. Because if you don't think about yourself, you also don't put things into perspective, and the time speeds up. So you think you did nothing, but several hours pass by. And in the opposite, if you're stressed, especially in some social situations, you go several hundreds of a mile per second. You come up with so many scenarios. What have you said? Was it okay? Was it not? But in reality, it's just a second time pass. So in the release phase, the resources is normally shared between default mode network and central executive network. And now the focus is shifting to CEN, where you start concentrating on the task, as well as you utilize your working memory a lot. And this part of the brain is basically juggling the information that it gets from the external output and stimuli and your internal systems, as well as you now know what to do. So your respiratory rate is stabilizing. It is still higher in comparison to the rest state. Rest state is when you sleep. This is the lowest pattern and the most stable pattern you will see. And the parasympathetic system, because you are calming down, is coming up online. So your pupils are still dilated. So if somebody looks at you, they will see something like this. The increased breath depths, you are breathing slower and deeper, but yet fast in comparison to the rest state. The heart rate variation is improving, meaning your heart is starting to beat more normally. It doesn't have very specific patterns. It does its own thing, and you have a slightly decreased body temperature. Flow. Now you've cleared all the obstacles in front of you, and you have no self-awareness whatsoever. You do exhibit some moderate stress markers because you still are thinking hard and you are exerting a lot of resources, mental and physical. You have no sense of time because, again, you have no self-reflection at this point. You have extreme focus. Central executive network is highly active, and every waking millisecond, your brain is, as I mentioned before, evaluates the external stimuli. Somebody came to your desk, there is a pigeon outside of your window, or a message pops up. You evaluate how important this is versus what you're doing now, as well as you're evaluating the error rate. For instance, very simple example, if you have your code and you run the tests, if the tests are still green and you can proceed, you will continue coding. If for some reason there is a bug in your code that you identified, then this is a external stimuli important to a task that can take you out of this flow. It will depend on your general state of mind. You have sense of control and joy and happiness, or at least like deep calm state. because you are not in a hurry, you are not in a danger, you are in a challenge state on your terms. The pattern that you would see on the graphs on your trackers would be stress low, still above the restful state. You will have stabilized but heightened body temperature, slightly dilated pupils, and potentially irregular time between breaths, as well as slightly above normal heart rate variation. So if you just put the measurements of your sleep next to the flow, there are gonna be some deviations, and if we plot the breath respiratory rate, then the flow state will be a little bit higher, but exhibit almost the same pattern. In recovery, so let's say you fixed this feature, you finished it, it works, you can close the ticket now, you reached your goal. This is where you get out of the flow because there is no input for this specific task left. Or the other reasons to get out of flow is your resources are insufficient, you want to go to the toilet, you are too thirsty, you are too sleepy, like physiologically you are not capable of handling the state anymore. Or there is some urgent situation that you need to take care of, and it takes precedent over your current task. For instance, your boss comes to a desk and like, I need this report now. You have to switch. So in this state, it characterizes by constricted pupils, more constricted than within the rest state. You have decreased breath depths, normalized time between breaths. HRV is there are no clear pattern among all participants and all studies, because the recovery phase is where your body decides on how to replenish the energy. And it is highly personalized. You might decide to just lay down, to meditate, to sleep, to eat, to go for a walk, to do sports, and like right after this activity. So the readings would be whatever you do. And this is also the moment where parasympathetic system is taking over completely and pushes your body into resting state. Reflection is an optional state or optional stage that is not mentioned in all or 90% of the researches that I read, because it's not a necessary stage, it is something intentional. So if you want to improve the occurrence of flow or the duration of flow stage itself, or shorten the other stages, you need to actively approach this and decide if you have some disadvantages or factors that kind of put you into distorted state, or you want to create a new habit that will help you get into focus state or not care more. In this state, you have slightly dilated pupils because you do learning, you do memory consolidation. Both default mode network and central executive network work with slightly focus on yourself because you evaluate your own experience. And well, then you are in the center of attention. You have a normalized temperature, you have normalized breath patterns, and absolutely normal waking pattern of HRV. So your heart is not going into overdrive, it's not underworking or overworking, it's just it exists. This state is necessary for active improving of the flow. You can forget about this if you want to track your general patterns, like behavioral patterns, and come to it later if you want to have more directed approach to this. So how do you analyze the whole thing? First of all, you need to understand your baseline patterns. And also, you saw that the questionnaire pops up only in one phase if we consider reflection an optional stage. Why is it? Because it's highly subjective state. There are no similar patterns across people. Like even if two developers are sitting next to each other and from their words they were in the flow, they might have very different readings because of the background that they have, because of the perception of the risk, because of even genetics. So you will fill in different questionnaires at the end of the day or right after, well, when you are able to identify that you just been in the flow. You will create sort of a binary features with this day good, this day bad, this day bad, this day good stuff. Afterwards, I encourage you to check for biometrics data to support your subjective experience. So you would, again, for this specific coding task, you would search for this curve in your HRV, in your breeze patterns. I think Garmin and the most watches actually have this graph, so you can just look at those. And also you should reflect on details. So identify the days, or if you have the time, which is amazing, but be aware of the biases, of time frame for a flow. Then you can also identify some behavioral or environmental factors like coffee makes me too awake to go into flow, but when I drink green tea, this is fine. Or painkillers, for instance, increase my focus. Or talking to Jeff completely destroys my focus. I don't know. Then once a week, so this is every day. Once a week, check trends for binary events. So how many of the flow instances you have, how do they correlate with the day, with the specific, ideally, again, if you have this data, this detail of the data, what time of the day it correlates with, and also think about some binary events that it can contribute to the flow or are very close to the flow. For instance, there's an interesting thing that says sports right before cognitive exercise is mostly destructive, where coffee 30 minutes, an hour before cognitive work or flow-inducing exercise is undecided, depending on how you react to caffeine. So for days with flow occurrence, compare binary events. And also you can go, like, for now we're talking about flow as a binary construct. There is or there is none. But for days without flow occurrence, you also compare the trends and try to identify, ideally you also put information like, have I tried? Then reflect on similarities and deviation. Plot the graphs together on the timeline and see if there are reoccurring patterns. Do it over multiple days. Regarding the self-assessment, for every single activity, there is a specified questionnaire that is designed to capture the state of flow and sometimes also the depth of flow. This is something I think is not necessary for us to talk about, whether flow is a spectrum or just a binary state. But in this case, it's something like, within the 9 dimensions that you have, did you feel in control? Did you think about yourself? Do you like what you did, or did you like what you did? Would you like to do it again? So this is all estimates the strength of those 9 dimensions, the boxes that I've showed you. You are not obliged to use 0 to 5 scale. You can use whatever scale, but please do keep it consistently. So what would you use for tracking? There are some things and some, like, for instance, you can use watches. Watches use light emitter, like they shine light to your skin and then read the reflected light energy and compare it. And on the difference alone, they do it like several hundred times within a second and identify the beats, how fast your blood goes through your body between the beats, as well as how saturated is it with oxygen. So it identifies breathing patterns, stress, rest, sleep, blood pressure. Not really, it can be deferred, but not accurately. Then there is also ECG, electrocardiogram straps. The problem with those is you have to put them on specific time, meaning you are anticipating flow entrance, but it's not given, so you are creating specific bias in your data. Still, can be used. It is way more detailed in comparison to watches, but at the end of the day, it measures the same thing. What you can look at the apps as well, you don't have to get the raw data because it's surprisingly hard for every single brand that I tried with. You can look at the general trends. You definitely should look at anomalies and anomaly trends. Do not react to anomaly right away because there are different things that can happen, and check out for seasonality. The problem with this data is infrequent sampling. None of the devices on the consumer grade do it on the level to be able to use for neurological assistance. In best case, readings are every 30 seconds, where your heart rate variation is in milliseconds. So you can imagine that this time series is not really applicable. It's hard to get raw data, surprising but fact. Aggregated data is presented in sometimes really mean way. It's sometimes really dumb, like moving average instead of actual trend computation, and also timing basis. If you're using something that you actively need to turn on, you're already creating a bias. Mental state, flow experience, and stress and mood can be assessed from your subjective questionnaire. And same thing, you can identify trends, cyclic components. For instance, I can always be on flow on Monday, but Friday, not a chance. Anomalies and shifts. This data creates a huge amount of biases because the person is very complex and the psychological state and physiological state plays the crucial role here. Basically, if you're hungry, very low chance that you can concentrate on anything. Or otherwise, if you work the other way around. And also the body adapts really fast. So something that worked for you 2 weeks ago might not be as effective in 2 weeks. Also in consistent scale, your perception of how what is good is changing over time, especially if you are on the same level all the time. Notebook, I told you I will show you if you want it. In additional factors, general health, higher happiness, autonomy over task, like you decide what you do, and certain level of skill, it is all required to have. Like if you're unhappy, stressful, or downright fearful, there is very low chance that you will succeed in focusing on anything. At the same time, illness, like things make sense, right? Negative mindset, perceived risk is too high. For instance, if you will get fired, if you won't finish this task, well, you probably will focus, but this is not going to be a flow state. You're not going to enjoy this. And genetics is an interesting one. There is definitely an evidence that you might be more prone or less prone to flow state, but you need a special environment and occasion to activate your advantage. So I would put it as, who knows. Also, you can't really assess whether you're predisposed or not. So take into account these dimensions, skill-based challenge, clear goals, and clear and fast feedback as absolute prerequisite. Merging of action and awareness, high concentration, sense of control over the activity, loss of self-awareness, loss of sense of time, and the autotelic nature of the experience is something that will tell you, yes, this focus session was a flow. Keeping this all in mind, if you want to improve your flow entry or occurrence, you have to concentrate on specific things and ask several questions like, what is my main problem? How I cannot concentrate. If I can concentrate, why can't I? I don't like people around me. I need music. What type of music do I need? And then you ask questions like, okay, if I introduce this thing, can I keep it up? How can I measure it? So that I need to put this into my questionnaire, right? I listen to music. What type of music? How long? And do consider some side effects and compound things. For instance, if you say, oh, I am a weakling, I need to do more sports, no chance that in 1 week you will have succeeded in increasing your focus. Moreover, probably you will have a decrease in your focus ability because the beginner state of doing sports is consuming you and depleting your body resource instead of building them up. So there is a compound effect to take into account. So if you want to be super analytic about it, then you would establish a baseline, like no additional factor, you just live your life, you just track your things, and for 2 to 4 weeks, then you choose one thing that is absolutely different from your normal behavior, and you start tracking the whole thing again with this one additional factor. You will plot after 2 to 4 months, or like 2 to 4 weeks, you will plot the graphs of the same timeline, like Monday to Monday, Tuesday to Tuesday, this time frame against each other to see if there were any deviations. And please do start, as I mentioned before, from the questionnaires and binary type of data and then go into the graph thing. And then, depending on that, you will see either an improvement, nothing, or decrease, and then you can decide whether you want to keep this pattern or not. So thank you for your attention. This is the main thing, the resources you can see here. And let's go into the questions first. Or if you want to, I can tell you more about what I did to improve my focus.
So how do we do? You tell. It seems like we go to questions. Is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay, we have several of those. After I finished my flow, is there some minimal length of time after which the next flow can occur?
Yes, it will be personally detectable, but you cannot go into next flow session until you have replenished your resources. So you have to feel the same level of alertness and fitness as in the first flow start. I can't tell you exactly how much in time there is, but the minimum span is to go to the toilet, drink some coffee, take a meditation or a small nap.
Do we have questions from audience who are not into Slido platform? Maybe you want to just raise your hand and ask something directly? Oh, everything is written. Everything is written in Slido. Okay. How long the flow phase could last?
Also, I didn't put a specific time onto the graph because it's impossible to identify, also because it's a very subjective state. Arguably, or like the hardest evidence of the flow end is when you feel yourself again, let's say, like when you identify that your internal me is back online. It can, so flow construct as a continuous thing can go from microflow, there is such a thing in the research field. Microflow is something up to a couple of minutes. Like you are so absorbed into reading an email, writing an email, so a couple of minutes, down to several hours of very strenuous activity. For instance, sports can be also flow inducing. It is actually the first task that people try to replicate flow with. And depending on how fit you are, how much rewarding the whole thing is, you can go out to several hours.
What about when people interrupt my flow? And that is an interesting question, and it's a little bit relatable to yesterday's first keynote when Pierre Luigi talked about that through the day there are more or less 40 various interruptions, phones, updates, colleagues, and so on and so on.
So if you want to introduce the concept of flow to improve the overall productivity of your team, you need to keep an eye, or like, for instance, as a team lead or like a organization, if you care about this, you need to take into account several things. People are different. For instance, I need an absolute cave-like feeling to be productive. Like everything needs to be dark and I only need to have my screen in front of me. I need, funnily enough, big earphones on my ears, not because of the music and the quality, but because of the feeling that it embraced me and kind of isolates me from my colleagues and stuff. So ideally in a team, you would identify which things work for you. Like you have a list of my distractions and my, let's call them improvement factors. You can check if the office is compatibly divided between different developers, because some need to talk as the part of the struggle phase. They need some reassurance maybe, or they need to bounce ideas and make sure that, yep, they got it, they have an idea. Or you are the isolation type person and you need to just sit there alone. So figure out with your colleagues what works for you, and try to zone your office into similar factors and see how that works. So you have to be proactive. If I understand the question correctly, you have to be proactive about your own experience and what works for you. Because if you don't know, nobody knows.
What did you do to improve your own flow besides big headphones? Yeah.
So one of the problems why I even started the whole topic is I was severely burned out to the point that I have no focus at all for nothing. And after some restoration phase, I was able to start coding again, but I realized that I'm easily distracted. I tried out different things. I went to cafes to work with headphones on, headphones in. I tried different music. I do have a small program that analyzes type of music and correlates it with whether I was in flow or not. And interestingly enough, for me, I understood that I like really hardcore, like evil almost, techno style music. So yeah, electronic music for the win. But in research, they mostly, and also science pop literature, they quote classic music. Didn't work for me, but I know people who it worked with. I talked to multiple people and figured out that one of my bosses, for instance, he needs absolute white space. And now no one in a huge office, like he needs to be alone in a beam of light, everything needs to be white, like a clean slate. So this is how he diminishes the distraction. So what I did, I drink coffee 30 minutes before I start working. My whole office room, I work from home, is super dark. It's green lush color with a specific colors, as well as identified that I can focus well when I have a very specific lighting, and it's LED in red focus, or like it's red lights, everything. For instance, a friend of mine tried to work in my office as well, and he set everything up with really bright blue lights. Worked for everybody differently. So play around, figure out, I would say.
How much more productive we are in the flow?
There is no specific number on this because we cannot reliably tell you that, yes, you've been in flow 75 minutes every day. But there are estimates that either very scientific, for instance, how much faster are you on answering the same questions or similar questions, math questions, or how much faster you are in general in react time. The estimate is around 500 times on more efficient on solving mathematical problems, and around 3 to 700, again, it's a very high range, more productive and efficient on cognitive tasks in general. Also, I have to mention here that one side effect of flow is general increase in happiness. So, for instance, positive psychology school, the grandfather of the flow theory is also the grandfather of the positive psychology. He saw the correlation in increased perceived happiness within the same behavior every day when people were going into the flow versus people who were not.
All right, and maybe one or two more, maybe last ones. What are the flow-inducing exercises?
Meditation. So basically, if you will be able to decrease the anxiety during the struggle phase, it will help you out, as well as meditation, mindfulness, or growth mindset. Let's put it also in the exercise basket. If you stress less, everything you do to stress less will improve your flow entry. Coffee is a really interesting one because technically caffeine increases your sympathetic nervous system activity, but at the same time, it's sort of a soul drink for many people. They associate it with the work or like happy feeling. They like the taste, and this perception of coziness can be it can be stronger on the arousal state than the actual caffeine. So again, you will have to figure out for yourself.
Alisa, you said meditation.
Yes.
So let's repeat after me. Okay. I'm just kidding. Maybe it's individual thing, eh? Maybe we need to find, as you say, our own ways. And okay, last question. It didn't get most of the likes, but I wanted to ask this one. I've heard that in flow state you can make more mistakes. What's your take on that?
This is an interesting one because one of the mechanism why you are keeping in the flow state is the assessment of your brain assesses the ratio of errors to correct output, meaning whatever you do needs to have a quick feedback. So in this sense, it is incorrect that you will do more mistakes, but it can be the case, depending on the task, it can be the case that you do not perceive them as mistakes. So I would say it's a little bit theoretical question, and it will require the very strong and serious definition: what is a mistake and what is the cost of the mistake, because your brain in the flow state can tolerate specific number of mistakes until it says, nope, I can't do this.